It's a great honor to speak to you. I like to see teachers, melamdim and melabdot, as shapers of souls. You have lives in your hands. You're not just educators. So I find it very humbling and a great honor to share a few words. Because if my words do have any meaning, you in turn hopefully can integrate it in your work and in turn shape lives and shape generations. Sometimes we have to step back, even while in the middle of doing our routines, and just appreciate the work you do. So I just wanted to begin with that acknowledgement. Educators are not necessarily the highest paid and the most valued people in our society, even though they're the ones that ultimately really can change a person's life for good, and unfortunately also the other way around. In the world that we live in, where we're not secluded in a shtetl or in a ghetto, and we're exposed to all the options out there, this is more acutely critical than ever before, because every child in your classes, as they grow older, will be exposed to everything, literally. A mobile phone, the whole world is right there. And in capitalism, they say, the customer is always right, there's competition, and people will be drawn to the things that are most relevant to them. So, you're doing your job right, they will continue to perpetuate what you've taught them. And if not, they may find something that they find more appealing, to put it quite bluntly. So with that said, let me share an anecdote that I think could set the tone for a few ideas that I believe are critically relevant to all of us. Again, maybe some ideas that you're familiar with. It doesn't hurt to always restate and then re-emphasize. So they tell the story, little Lucy comes home from school. She's been studying biology, which, as we know, the first time you study it, maybe the second and third time as well, it can be quite confusing. And she's all intrigued by the origin of our species. Where do we come from? The human species, the Homo sapiens. So she comes home and asks her mother, says, "Mom, where do we originate from?" So her mother breaks out into a warm smile and says to her, "Sit down and let me share with you the yichus, the pedigree, where our ancestors. We had a great-grandfather and a great-grandmother. One came from Czechoslovakia, one came from Poland. They're beautiful people. I didn't know them, but I knew their children, their grandparents. Go back a few generations back, we had a great-great-grandfather who composed a very important work on Jewish law. And the farther back we go, the better it gets. All the way to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah, our biblical patriarchs and matriarchs, all the way back to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. I mean, can't get better than that. When her father comes home, she asks him the same question: where do we come from? And he has a very different reaction. His face gets all ashen and almost like disturbed. He says, "Sit down, brace yourself. I always rue this day. Where we originate from? Well, a few million years back, we originate from apes. And before that, from amphibians. And even further back, from one-celled bacteria. All the way back to billions of years ago, a ball of gas." So you could imagine it's a very different answer than her mother gave. So she runs back to her mother and says, "I don't understand. I asked you both the same question, completely different answers." So her mother smiles again and says, "We both told you the truth. Your father told you about his ancestors. And I told you about mine." So, there you have it. Maybe we have the reconciliation of creationism and evolution. Depends which side of the family, or how you want to look at things. I say this not just as an opening joke, but actually it really reflects two different approaches, perspectives on life. It's not just about our origins, it's who we are right now. Are we fundamentally animals that have become civilized and grown in intelligence, or are we something more than that? Are we transcendent souls that happen to occupy a body? As someone once coined it and said that we're not physical beings on a spiritual journey, we're spiritual beings on a physical journey. So with that as a backdrop, being that Rosh Hashanah is coming just a few days from now, and one of the great challenges I face, I speak to audiences, most likely not necessarily captive audiences, wonderful, beautiful teachers, educators. I speak to people who have challenges with issues of God and Judaism and Torah and religion, and for many good reasons. Either they were turned off by it because it was taught to them in a very irrelevant way, or they're just ignorant. And so I'm not facing a neutral situation. Here I am standing with a beard and a yarmulke in front of audiences that maybe some people call me the rabbi of atheists. I deal with a lot of atheists. They happen to like me. And I ask them, how do you deal with me? And I do talk about God. They say, your God I can deal with. You know? Which is like, reminds me of Rabbi Simon line when he once told a self-proclaimed atheist, he said to him, the God you don't believe in, I also don't believe in. So this is the audiences I deal with often. Now maybe some of you have some of these questions as well. We all have questions. I by nature am a skeptic, and I don't believe that we have to silence anyone when they ask questions. But you have to dig deeper and find a deeper relevance. So when it comes to Rosh Hashanah, for instance, so we're coming to the high holidays, to me the challenge is always one thing and one thing only. Why should you care? I'm not saying you. Why should anyone in this world who's busy with whatever they're busy, why should they care if Rosh Hashanah is coming? I understand out of guilt or superstition or tradition, people, Rosh Hashanah coming, a new year, new year. But what personal message is there that we can convey to us and turn to our children, to our students, and to anyone we meet? So I want to talk about three things that I think we can take from Rosh Hashanah that is both universal and relevant and personal. And above all, in the context of what we heard this morning, that can directly impact how you educate and how you look at your children in your classrooms. And the three things, I will capture them all in an acronym. I just thought of the acronym this morning. It's called Nachas. We all know what Nachas is, right? It's hard to translate in English. How do you translate Nachas? And Nachas is a point of title: pride, joy, pleasure that you gain usually from children or from family. Anyone has a better translation? All the educators say nobody can translate. Okay, Nachas is Nachas, like chutzpah. What the guy said, well, how do you say chutzpah in Hebrew or Yiddish? You know, that's called chutzpah, because it comes from originally. So, Nachas. Nachas has three letters: Nun, Ches, and a Tav, which is Nun, we'll say for Neshomo, Ches for Chidush, Renewal, and Tav for Tachlis, for purpose. So what happened on Rosh Hashanah exactly? Why do we celebrate Rosh Hashanah? So we're told the primary thing is the birthday of the human race. Adam and Eve were created on the sixth day of creation. The biblical story and narrative, Adam and Eve were created. The sixth day of creation, according to tradition, is the first day of Tishrei, which is the beginning of the new year. The Talmud says that the actual creation of the world was on the 25th of Elul, which is actually today, right? Is it today? Tomorrow. Okay, good. Right, so tomorrow's Chafayel, the creation of the world. 6 days later will be Rosh Hashanah. So what's the significance of the birth of the human race? Why should that be important? Well, think of it personally. It's about the birthday of each one of us. At least of our first ancestor, Adam and Eve, according to the mother at least. And so a birthday is a significant day. So when we read in the Torah, the story in the Bible, what is the first thing that jumps out at you? The description of a human being. Who is the human being? If you want to educate someone, you have to know what they're made of. What makes us tick? So from a Torah perspective, it doesn't say an intelligent creature, an emotional creature, a social animal, or any other such definitions. It says that God created the human being, B'Tselem Elokim, right? In the divine image, which itself is quite cryptic. What does that mean? So the Bible does give us some hint. It says that God took a clump of earth, took Afar min Ha'adama, took earth from the ground, and imbued it, breathed into it actually, Vayipach ba'apav nishmat chayim. He imbued it with the breath of life. And that's why it's called Neshomo. Neshomo is the same words and letters as the word Neshima, breath. That's why you find in so many spiritual disciplines, breath is so much connected to spiritual growth. Is the breath of God that imbued a inanimate piece of clump of clay or earth into a living entity. So divine breath. Now in simple terms, it means when you look at a human being, I look at you right now, I could look at your body, you can see your look, physical look, your body language, how you dress, but does that identify who you are? Or that identifies how you manifest. Who you are, you're a soul. You're a pure divine soul. Now that soul goes through a journey. When you study the Kabbalistic and mystical teachings, it talks about how that soul manifests in a physical reality. But today that's not difficult to explain to people. I mean, just like you see a light bulb burning, and you know there's electricity in it, you don't see the electricity, but you see the fact that we are living creatures, we breathe, our hearts are beating, our minds are working, we're functioning individuals, means there's a force within it. That force is not just electrical, it's not just chemical. From a Torah point of view, it's divine. A spiritual entity that has manifested itself in a physical body. The first and most important thing to know when you look at any human being, but especially as a parent looks at a child and a teacher looks at a child, is to know that they are a Neshomo. You have in your care, for whatever reason God chose you to take care of His divine soul that was born into your home or given to your caretaking and education in your classroom. When you think of people that way, think of a child that way, it changes our entire perspective. It's not just about you giving and going to impart information and data. You're talking about giving the soul empowerment to be able to go through its journeys in life. And we all know those journeys are going to be challenging. So all education, all knowledge are tools. But if you don't recognize that these tools have a purpose, the purpose is to speak to this soul. This child, as the child grows up, is going to need more than anything, spiritual resources. Not just a lot of knowledge. Knowledge can give you information, you can get a good job, make a lot of money. But it's not going to give you the next of Nachas, after Neshomo, I'll go to the tough, Tachlis, purpose. Every business must have a mission statement. You don't need to go to business school to know that. A business without a mission statement cannot function, cannot be efficient. So the question we have to ask ourselves, and in many ways I would say that's the unspoken question, and maybe spoken, that you should ask yourself when you're teaching your children, what is the mission statement of this child's life? What is the purpose? Why did the soul come into this world? And if a business can't function without a mission statement, no matter how much money they have and how much knowledge and data and information they have, it will not be successful. So then let's apply that on a personal note. What is our mission? You can say your mission, at least in the part job that you do as a teacher, as an educator, is to help shape those souls. That is one of the most significant missions one can have. But the children that you're educating will be doing many different things in life. So the second thing is to recognize that they have a mission, and that mission, and this is maybe the most important point of all, is called an indispensable mission. When the Talmud, the Mishnah, explains the creation of the human being, makes a point to state that every human being was created, Lufikach Nivra Adam Yechidi. Why was a human being created as an individual? Not as a group, not a herd. All the animals and all the other creatures, including vegetation and all species, were created as groups. Whether it's a group of vegetation, whether it's animals, whether it's fish in the sea. Human beings were created as an individual. And the Mishnah says, beautiful statement, because every human being is responsible to say and to feel that the entire world was created for them. Not out of arrogance, but because they have an indispensable mission to play in this world. We live in a world today of close to 8 billion people. I can tell you, and I'm sure you're aware of this, most people think that they're not significant fundamentally. What is one grain of sand on a beach? What is one human being in the face of 8 billion? It's almost like it's completely irrelevant. And I've asked this question to many audiences. I said, do you think you really matter? Do you matter? So of course, the initial response is a chuckle, a giggle. Of course I matter. I have a healthy ego. Look at the plaques on my wall. Look at my accomplishments. My family loves me, hopefully. And all these things are like, so to speak, a testimony to your value. But is that really your value? That's what's called circumstantial value. You know, you happen to be here. But then when I reverse the question, I say, if you were never born, would it make any difference to anybody? Remember, if you're never born, there's no tragedy because no one's expecting you. It's only once you're here, of course you justify your existence. And then people start thinking, 1 second, maybe not. What difference would it make if I wasn't born? Maybe someone else would have done the job I did. Says the Torah, no. You and your children and your students, each one individually is absolutely indispensable. And just like in a musical composition, if you take out one musical note, or in a computer program, you take out one line of programming, one dot, the entire program won't work. That is the key significance and indispensability of each individual in this world. Now you tell me, if you, every morning when you start your class, and you look at your children, the students in that classroom, whoever they may be, no matter what they accomplished or didn't accomplish, how academically proficient they are or not, that they are a chosen soul by God, put into this world, and with something unique to contribute, a unique mission that only they can accomplish. When you take that attitude, it changes everything. First of all, there's no such thing as a child that's like weaker than another. Yes, they may be not strong in their academics or their ability to communicate or their lucid thinking. Every child is different in that sense. But as far as God's child, we say, "Maisi yodel ispoyer." These are my, God says. That's my handiwork that you're dealing with. The children that are in your care are my handiwork, and I'm proud of them no matter what happens. Now, that's not a license to do whatever they want and have no discipline and no education. Doesn't mean like you're perfect. Obviously, the goal is to actualize that great potential, which is the job that you have, that we have, that all of us who are educators have. Which brings me to the third point of the ches, the Chidush, that Rosh Hashana teaches us. In addition to the fact that each is a soul, and each person is a soul and has an indispensable mission and purpose, is also the concept we call it a new year. There's a reason it's called a new year. Because it teaches us about renewal. I find in my own mentoring and work that I do, that one of the great challenges is not the symptoms of problems, but the root of them. And the root of most problems begin in a very innocuous way. When someone's bored, and they're busy with their routines and patterns, and they're looking for a rush of excitement, and they can't find it in a healthy way, where do you think they're going to turn? I was once speaking to a group of what we call recovering addicts. These were really young adults in their early 20s, who in their teens got into trouble, whether with drugs, alcohol, other addictions. And now they were so-called on the rebound. And it was an informal conversation with maybe 60, 70 young men and women. And I asked them, I said, none of you set out on your journey to become an addict. Nobody said, I want to be an addict. Who wants to be controlled by any substance or any activity? It's not the nature of a human being. So I would like to go around the room and say, tell me, how did you get into trouble in the first place? So you have the usual suspects that everybody identifies, which includes having a broken home. This one went through a very ugly divorce, his parents, looking for some relief. This one had bad friends. I mean, you always have a story that leads people into certain places, not always in their control. Or after we finished all of that, I said, yeah, but still, two of you, different people go through similar things, and they don't end up in trouble like you did. So we discussed this. So one of the things I wanted to introduce was the element of boredom. When you have all those ingredients that I just mentioned, and then you're also bored, and you have nothing that's motivating you, what do you think is going to happen? The human spirit needs stimulation. So you're going to turn to whatever can give you stimulation and relief. And even in your illusion, transcendence. And you could see, looking at the young men and women, I saw that it resonated with them. So it's something you don't easily identify. Comes Rosh Hashana and teaches us the statement you see many times in Rashi, the commentary in the Torah, taken from the Medrash, where it says Hayyim. this week. Today you stand all together. What's this today? When is this today? Moses said it thousands of years ago. And yet we read it today. Say the commentaries, as I said from Medrash, because we have to look at the Torah and Judaism as if it's constantly being renewed. It's not old story. It's happening right now in your personal life. That is a critical component. And if you cannot identify the relevance in your personal life, then it becomes something, okay, I'll do it out of tradition, as I mentioned before, guilt, out of to make my parents happy, my grandparents happy. If any of your children end up being Jewish because of those reasons, yes, it may work on the short term, but that's not called being a passionate Jew. So how do you make it come alive? That means you have to ask the question, let's start like I did with Rosh Hashana. Why should Rosh Hashana be a critical and relevant message to us? You have to personalize it. And without that personalization, what ends up happening is we're studying about an old tradition. When when China opened up in 1971, all of you are probably too young to remember that. That's a compliment. So it was the first time the Western world had access to this ancient civilization called China. Chao Enlai was the prime minister, who took over after Mao Zedong. So the Western journalists asked him a question. They said, "What do you think about the American Revolution?" So his answer, a classic Chinese answer, he said, "It's too early to tell." Because America is only 250 years old, and the Chinese civilization is 1,500 years old, or whatever the amount. I hear from people who do business in China that they respect no one but the Jews. I didn't say they love, but they respect, because the Jews are the only ones here longer than they are. And they respect longevity. There's no way, and I remember as a teenager myself, as a skeptic, I used to ask myself the question, is this whole Judaism, is it some man-made program just to keep people in line, or is there something more? I could not come to an answer, but I also cannot deny the fact that for thousands of years, intelligent Jews perpetuated this tradition. That means they must have seen something that was valuable. And that brings me to that point of relevance. In this week's Parsha, a major statement is made by Moses. He's spoken to the Jewish people and he says to them, in the long journey that you and your children and grandchildren will take, you may sometimes wonder whether Judaism, or Torah, mitzvahs, is accessible, is relevant. And he says, Lo rechoikehi, it's not distant, and Lo b'shamayim, it's not in heaven, and Lo me'ever layami, and it's not across the wide sea. And here's the key statement he says, Ki, korev alecha hadavar ma'od, leficha b'vavcha la'asosa. Because this thing, Torah, mitzvahs, tshuva, however you interpret it, uses the word karov. Now what does karov mean? Literally means close, but does it mean physical proximity? That I'm sitting right near a chumash, near a Torah? Close means relevant. That it's not some inaccessible or abstract idea, but it's relevant to your life. We say it in the evening prayer every day. We say, Chayenu va'erech yameinu. It's our life and our sustenance. I can tell you personally, everything I do, I always ask myself that question. The thing I'm going to teach now, or I'm going to speak about or write about, is it going to be relevant to the reader? And I'm talking about a reader that's not necessarily, as I said before, a captive audience, or I'm speaking to my own colleagues, but a reader who does not necessarily accept any of the axioms that I accept. Is it relevant? So, combining these three key points, the idea that every child is fundamentally and first and foremost a soul, a divine soul, and indispensable with a particular mission that that child and only that child can accomplish. No one else can play the music of that child. And that we need to infuse what we teach, whatever we teach, with vitality, with a certain dynamic element that's constantly being renewed. It's not old hat. It's not something we're just doing because we did it last year. I assure you, armed with those 3 points, it can transform every child you speak to. Now, this takes work. I'm not suggesting it doesn't take work. It takes a lot of work. To quote a non-Jewish poet who wrote a poem called The Voiceless. The Voiceless. Oliver Wendell Holmes, I'm sorry. And he says a devastating opening line. He says the following: "Alas to those that die with their song still inside them." You hear that? Alas to those that die with their song still inside them. Every one of us, every one of the children, every student, every human being for that matter, is born and created with a song. And more than one song that's unique to that child. And many of us will never sing that song. Simply because, number one, peer pressure, the pressure to conform, to become like others, not to be themselves. I remember my son came back from school one day, he was like 7 years old, he was all excited. He says to me, I said, "Why are you so excited?" "I heard something really nice today." "What was it?" He said, "You were born an original, don't become a copy." So, I as a father got excited as well. And I remembered it, I never forgot it. Recently, my son already has his own children now. And lives in Pittsburgh, just moved to Pittsburgh. Not that it's relevant, just pointing out. I'm speaking with Nachas. That's an example of Nachas, right? And I said to him recently, I said, "So, tell me, did you become a copy or an original?" He didn't even remember the whole story when he was a child. I remember. So I reminded him. Now, it happens to be, he's a copywriter. And he's a creative director, he's a copywriter, very good copywriter at that. So in his cute way, he says to me, "Well, I became an original copy," whatever that means. My point is this. Imagine you have in your control, whether you like it or not, to be able to elicit the song of every student in your classroom. And I can assure you that when you do that, it will also help you sing your song. When a person has that courage and awareness that they have that unique song, that changes lives. I can tell you, I was a wild and not a very rebellious teenager. I wasn't a great student at all. And it was when something happened, more than one thing happened, but it was a process. But ultimately, it was a resonating truth, and resonating like a song. When I heard the song of Judaism, especially through its spiritual dimension, that I could not deny. Nobody can ignore a song. A song is a song. It's not an empirical proof, it's not a scientific theory. It touches your heart and soul. I want to bless each of you, the sacred duty and the sacred gift that you have, the responsibility that you have souls in your hands. Pain le'han nefesh. You have souls. And these souls have special songs to sing. And whatever you teach, doesn't really matter. Secular studies, Hebrew studies, mathematics, the Bible, whatever it may be, Parsha, all of that is a means to an end, to help empower that child to sing his or her unique song. And when you see those fruits grow, and you see how they will enter this world, in a world that's a very confusing world, we need as many resources as possible, this whole mess, information revolution they call it, but it's also a lot of information confusion. We're inundated, everybody wants something from us. So we have to create the best defense is offense. And you are on that offensive front line. And as I said before, I'm honored to share a few words with you. We should all have a sweet and healthy year, and may it really be a true year of renewal, collectively and individually, a year of respecting and appreciating, celebrating the soul that was born on Rosh Hashana, our collective soul and our individual souls. And that renewal and significance of Nachas, Neshomo, Chidush, Renewal, and Tachlis, and purpose. And may all together, all our songs join together in one grand symphony where we merit the global transformation that we call the Geula, where the entire world will be basking in harmony within diversity. Thank you so much. Shana Tova.
Even more special when I know I'm holding this back on. Thank you. Thank you for the tremendous inspiration. The pleasure we can garner from this event. We could not have related more to the idea of differentiation without even speaking, they're meeting every child where they're at, singing their shir. We got this Parashat Azim, the Shia. B'ezrat Hashem, we should all be so happy to take those words and B'ezrat Hashem bring them into fruition. Tzachak to us all. Thank you. Remember which person can speak.
Good morning, everybody. Middle school,
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. You were born an original, don't become a copy. Thank you. Tell Khani,